He stood still while the room laughed, holding his breath so his child wouldn't feel it. What followed wasn't revenge or triumph, but a quiet crossing of lives where power meant shelter, and protection came from the least expected place. Stay for the moments that don't announce themselves. The room was built to reward confidence. Glass walls caught the city and folded it inward, reflecting long tables, leather chairs, and the quiet certainty of people accustomed to being believed. He stood near the back with his daughter's backpack looped over one shoulder, careful not to let it touch the polished floor. He had arrived early because that was safer than being late. He stayed standing because no one had offered him a seat. The meeting moved on without him. Words passed across the table numbers, timelines, assurances spoken easily, as though nothing fragile existed among them. When his turn came, it was brief, a glance, a pause, then a dismissal delivered with polite efficiency. The woman at the head of the table did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Her correction was precise, public, and final. He nodded once. He always nodded. There was no defense to offer that would not sound like explanation. An explanation was a luxury he no longer spent. Around him, the air shifted. A few smiles appeared, not unkind, just relieved that the discomfort belonged to someone else. His daughter looked up at him, her small hand tightening around his fingers. He felt it. That squeeze, more than the words. They were excused without ceremony. He gathered his papers, already knowing they would not be used. As he turned, the room had already turned away. The corridor outside was quieter. He breathed again. His daughter asked if they were done. He said yes, because it was true in every way that mattered. They walked toward the elevators, the rhythm of their steps returning to something familiar. He was thinking about lunch, about the easiest way home, about how to make the day feel unbroken. The sound came from behind them, a sharp interruption. Not loud, just wrong. A chair scraped. Someone spoke a name too quickly. He turned because habit had trained him to notice shifts in tone. The woman from the meeting stood near the doorway, one hand braced against the wall. The certainty that had filled the room moments earlier was gone. Her face had lost its color, her focus slipping as though the floor were moving beneath her. Others hesitated. There was a moment when everyone assessed their distance from responsibility. He did not think. He stepped forward, placing himself between her and the hard edge of the table as she faltered. He set his bag down, guided her to sit, steady and firm without touching more than necessary. His voice was low, unremarkable. He asked if she could hear him. She nodded once. It was enough. Someone called for assistance. Another offered water, too late. He stayed where he was, his body angled protectively, not out of courage but practice. His daughter hovered close, watching with the serious attention she reserved for things that mattered. He caught her eye and gave the smallest shake of his head. This was not something to fear. When help arrived, it was efficient, professional. The crisis resolved itself into procedure. As the tension drained, people resumed their roles, their voices returning to normal. He stepped back then, lifting his bag, reaching for his daughter's hand. He expected nothing. He was already leaving. Wait. The word was quiet, but it carried. The woman was sitting upright now, her breathing even. She looked at him as though seeing him for the first time, not as a line item or an inconvenience, but as a presence that it held. "Thank you," she said. It was not ceremonial. It sounded unfamiliar in her mouth. He inclined his head. "Of course." Her gaze shifted to the child beside him. Something softened. Just briefly. "I'm sorry," she said, though it was unclear to whom the apology belonged. He did not answer. There were apologies that required response, and others that were better left untouched. He guided his daughter toward the elevators again. This time the room did not laugh. It watched. As the doors closed, his daughter leaned against him, her cheek pressing into his arm. "You helped her," she said. Not as a question. Yes, she was scared. Yes, that was all. The elevator descended, carrying them back toward the ordinary world. Behind them, the glass room returned to its reflections, its confidence intact but altered in a way no one would name. He did not look back. He was already thinking about lunch again, about keeping the day whole. They did not go home right away. The city pressed in with its usual insistence. Traffic, noise, the friction of bodies moving past one another. But he felt the subtle pull of delay. His daughter walked beside him, her steps lighter now, her attention drifting to shop windows and passing dogs. The morning had unsettled her more than she admitted. He could see it in the way she stayed close, how her fingers brushed sleeve. They stopped at a small cafe near the station, the kind that survived on regulars and habit rather than design. He ordered the same thing he always did. She chose her pastry carefully, weighing options as though the decision carried significance. They sat by the window, and for a while, nothing happened. That was the point. He was halfway through his coffee when his phone vibrated. He frowned at the unfamiliar number, hesitated, then answered. The voice on the other end was measured, careful. It explained circumstances without excess detail. There had been concern, an assessment, a recommendation. The woman from the meeting had declined a hospital stay, but was advised not to be alone for the next several hours. She had asked specifically for him. He closed his eyes briefly. The refusal rose easily, practiced and polite, but it did not leave his mouth. He looked at his daughter, who was watching him now, her expression open, expectant. He asked where they were. The answer came quickly, as though waiting. When he hung up, the cafe felt smaller. He folded his napkin, smoothed it, then told his daughter they needed to make one more stop. She nodded, accepting the change without protest. Trust, he knew, was built in moments like this, when routine bent, but did not break. The building they arrived at later was quieter than he expected, not the towering symbol of power he had imagined, but something older, set back from the street. Inside, the air was cool, the light softened by tall windows and pale walls. The woman met them at the door herself. She had changed clothes, traded precision for comfort. She looked diminished in a way that was not weakness, simply human scale. "I'm glad you came," she said. Not relief gratitude. He stepped aside to let his daughter enter first. The girl paused, taking in the unfamiliar space, then removed her shoes neatly by the door without being asked. The woman noticed this. Her mouth curved slightly, not quite a smile. They moved into the living room. It was spare, carefully arranged, as though meant to be observed rather than used. He felt the weight of it, the distance between this place and the small apartment where every surface bore the mark of living. He set his bag down, unzipped it, and handed his daughter her book. "I'll make tea," the woman said, already moving toward the kitchen. "I can," he replied automatically. She stopped, considered, then nodded. He filled the kettle, his movement steady. The kitchen was immaculate, unused in the way that suggested meals were optional here. He chose mugs from a cabinet that held too many choices, each untouched. When the water boiled, the sound felt louder than it should have. They sat together afterward, the three of them occupying the space cautiously. His daughter read aloud softly, tracing the words with her finger. The woman listened, though she pretended not to. He watched them both, measuring the room for danger, for imbalance. None presented itself. Time passed differently there. The afternoon light shifted across the floor. The woman rested her head back against the chair, eyes closed for a moment longer than comfort allowed. He noticed and adjusted, offering a glass of water without comment. She accepted it with a nod. "I don't usually ask for help," she said later, as though stating a fact rather than a confession. "I know," he replied. She looked at him then, searching for something she did not name. He did not fill the silence. His daughter finished her chapter and looked up, waiting. He smiled at her, small and reassuring. She returned to her book. When evening approached, the woman asked about dinner. The question was tentative, uncertain. He suggested something simple. They ordered in. When the food arrived, they ate at the table, the arrangement awkward at first, then easing. The woman laughed once, surprised by it, as though the sound belonged to someone else. Later, as they prepared to leave, she hesitated. "Would you stay?" she asked. "Not overnight, just until the night settled." He considered the request carefully, weighing obligation against instinct. His daughter looked up at him again, calm, secure. He nodded. They did not speak much after that. The apartment held them quietly. A temporary shelter formed without intention. When they finally stood to go, the woman walked them to the door. She did not offer payment or apology. She simply said, "Thank you for keeping the day from breaking." He understood what she meant. Outside, the city had softened. His daughter took his hand. As they walked away, he realized the door behind them remained open, not as an invitation, but as a possibility neither of them had named. The days that followed did not announce themselves. They arrived one at a time, ordinary and unremarkable, stitched together by small agreements that were never spoken aloud. He continued his routines. His daughter went to school, her backpack always zipped, her hair smoothed each morning with the same careful hand. The woman remained present, not intruding, not withdrawing, learning the shape of their lives by watching rather than directing. She did not return immediately to her world. Messages came and went. Calls were answered selectively, then less often. She dressed simply now, her clothes chosen for comfort rather than signal. When she arrived at his apartment the first morning after, she brought nothing but herself. She stood at the door uncertainly, as though unsure whether she belonged on that side of it. He stepped aside without ceremony. His daughter greeted her with a wave, already accustomed to her presence. There was no discussion about staying. The kettle boiled. Breakfast was made. The day began. The apartment was small, but it carried history. Marks on the wall tracked his daughter's height across years. The couch sagged in the middle, shaped by evenings spent together. The woman noticed these things quietly, as though cataloging evidence of care. She did not comment. She adapted, moving around the space with awareness, careful not to disrupt its rhythm. He watched her as he always did, with attention that bordered on caution. He had learned that disruption often arrived, masked as generosity. But she did not rearrange, did not offer solutions. When she washed dishes, she asked where things went. When she helped with homework, she listened more than she spoke. The child responded first. It was subtle, a laugh that came easier, a story told without prompting. She showed the woman her drawings, explained the rules of games that changed each time they were played. The woman accepted these shifts without correction. She let herself be instructed. Evenings settled into patterns. Dinner at the table. A book read aloud. Sometimes the woman listened from the kitchen. Sometimes she joined them, her presence steady, unobtrusive. He noticed how she leaned forward when his daughter spoke, how her eyes followed the small movements that revealed mood more than words ever could. One night, after the child had gone to bed, they sat in silence for a long time. The apartment hummed with its familiar sounds. The refrigerator, the distant traffic. The woman wrapped her hands around her mug, watching the steam fade. "This is quiet," she said finally. Not as an observation, but as recognition. He nodded. It took time. She did not ask how much. Her life pressed at the edges now. Documents appeared on her phone, names surfaced that carried weight. She handled them with restraint, never letting them spill into the room. When she left for meetings, she returned before evening, her shoulders tense, her voice softer. He did not ask what happened. He learned to read the signs, when to offer food, when to leave space. The child noticed too. One afternoon, she took the woman's hand without asking and led her to the couch. They sat together, coloring in silence. The woman followed the lines carefully, staying inside the borders. When she finished, she smiled, small and genuine. Trust formed not through declarations, but through repetition. He came home one evening to find the woman repairing a loose hinge on the cabinet door. She looked up, startled as though caught doing something private. He thanked her. She shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. Later, she admitted she had never fixed anything before. "It's just patience," he said. She absorbed that, the idea that patience could be practical. There were moments of imbalance. Times when the weight of her world pressed close, when she withdrew slightly, as though remembering the distance she once required. He responded by anchoring harder to routine. Breakfast still happened. Homework was still checked. The child still went to bed on time. One evening, the woman lingered at the doorway after dropping the child at school. "You don't have to do this," she said, gesturing vaguely to the apartment, to the life unfolding inside it. "I know," he replied. That was enough. As the weeks passed, the apartment adjusted to her presence. A toothbrush appeared beside his in the bathroom. A scarf hung on the back of a chair. Nothing was announced. Nothing was claimed. The child accepted these changes as natural, her sense of safety intact. He realized one night, watching the woman tuck the child in, that quiet was not the absence of feeling. It was the presence of trust. It was knowing what would happen next and believing it would be gentle. When the woman turned from the bedroom door and met his gaze, there was something unguarded there. Not gratitude, not need, recognition. Neither of them spoke. The quiet held. Staying, he learned, was not an action, but a condition. It did not announce itself with decisions or promises. It settled quietly, like dust in sunlight, visible only if one paid attention. The woman began leaving earlier in the mornings now. Her work could no longer be postponed without consequence. She dressed with more intention again, though she no longer wore armor. When she left, she paused by the door each time, checking the room as though taking inventory, his coat on the chair, the child's shoes by the wall, the faint smell of toast still in the air. Then she went. He watched her absence ripple through the day. The apartment held its shape, but something waited. He did not fill that space deliberately. He focused on his daughter's needs, on the predictable arc of hours. School, work, dinner. The familiar sequence steadied him. She returned in the evenings, tired in a way that was not physical. Sometimes she spoke about her day in fragments, meetings, decisions, expectations, never asking for advice, never seeking reassurance. Other nights, she said nothing at all. He accepted both with the same care. They began to share tasks without discussion. Groceries appeared. Laundry was folded. He noticed how she learned the logic of the place, which pan heated unevenly, which drawer stuck unless lifted slightly. She did not complain. She adapted. The child remained the measure of everything. When she sensed tension, she grew quieter, more observant. When she felt secure, she filled the space with questions and stories. The woman listened as though each word mattered. He watched the exchange with a guarded softness, aware of the risk in allowing anyone else to hold that kind of influence. One night, the power went out. It was brief, a city inconvenience, but the sudden darkness startled the child. She reached for him instinctively. He pulled her close, murmuring reassurance. The woman found a flashlight in her bag, its beam cutting a narrow path through the room. They sat together on the couch until the lights returned, the three of them breathing in the same small pocket of calm. Afterward, the woman did not move right away. She sat with her hands folded, staring at the floor. "I didn't know it could be like this," she said quietly. He did not ask what she meant. He understood enough. There were moments when he felt the weight of her presence pressing against old fears. He had learned to build a life that required little from others. Independence had been survival. Allowing someone else to stay meant accepting the possibility of loss again. He showed this not with words, but with restraint. He did not reach for her. He did not name what was growing between them. He kept his boundaries intact, not as walls, but as care. She noticed. She respected it, even when it cost her something. Once, she stopped herself mid-sentence, a question left unfinished. He met her eyes, acknowledged the pause, then returned to what he was doing. She exhaled slowly, as though releasing something she had been holding. The child bridged the distance without effort. One afternoon, she asked if the woman would come to her school play. The question was casual, unguarded. The woman hesitated only a moment before agreeing. The performance was small, forgettable to anyone else. To the child, it was everything. The woman sat beside him in the crowded room, her knee almost touching his. When the child appeared on stage, searching the audience, she found them together. Her smile was immediate, radiant. The woman felt it then, the responsibility in that look, the trust extended without condition. Afterward, the child ran to them, breathless and proud. The woman praised her sincerely, crouching to her level. He watched the exchange, his chest tightening with something close to fear. Later that night, after the child was asleep, he stood at the sink washing dishes. The woman leaned against the counter nearby, watching him. "You don't ask for much," she said. He rinsed a plate, set it aside. "I ask for what I can keep." She absorbed that, the implications settling between them. Outside, the city moved on, indifferent. Inside, something held steady. Staying, he realized, was becoming mutual. Not claimed, not declared, simply practiced day after day in the long middle where nothing dramatic happened and everything changed. The middle did not hurry. It stretched itself across weeks, then months, marked not by milestones but by familiarity. Seasons shifted almost without notice. Jackets appeared by the door. The child's shoes were replaced with a larger pair. The woman learned to recognize these changes as significant, even when they were quiet. She began arriving earlier in the evenings when she could. On those days, she helped with dinner, chopping vegetables slowly, deliberately, as though learning a language through repetition. Sometimes she failed, burning something, misjudging timing. She laughed at herself, embarrassed but unashamed. He corrected without criticism. The child observed, amused, offering commentary that made them both smile. They developed habits together, a walk after dinner when the weather allowed, a shared silence at the table before bedtime, each of them lingering as though reluctant to end the day. The woman began to sit closer to him without realizing it, their shoulders brushing lightly. He noticed and did not pull away. Still, he kept watch over himself. The instinct to protect his daughter overrode everything. He measured the woman's consistency, her ability to remain present even when her life demanded more. She passed these tests without knowing they were being given. She showed up. She stayed when it was inconvenient. She left when necessary, and returned as promised. One evening, the child fell ill. It was nothing serious, just a fever, but it disrupted the household's careful balance. The woman canceled the meeting without hesitation, sitting on the edge of the bed, holding a cool cloth against the child's forehead. She did not flinch at the responsibility. She stayed through the night, sleeping lightly in the chair, waking at every shift in breath. In the early hours, he found her there, eyes heavy but focused. He thanked her quietly. She shook her head, as though the gratitude was misplaced. "This is where I should be," she said. The word stayed with him. After that, something loosened, not all at once, but enough to notice. He began to speak more small things at first. Stories from before, offered without explanation. She listened carefully, never pressing for more. When she shared pieces of her past, they were offered with the same restraint. No confessions, only truths laid gently between them. The child sensed the shift. One night, she asked if the woman would stay forever. The question was not urgent. It was curious, hopeful. The woman froze, her breath catching. He waited, his own heart steady but alert. "I don't know yet," the woman said honestly, "but I want to." The child accepted this without disappointment. She nodded, satisfied. "Okay." Later, when the child was asleep, the woman apologized for not giving a clearer answer. He stopped her with a look. "She needed truth," he said. "You gave her that." The woman looked at him then with something close to reverence. "You're careful," she said. "Yes, and still you let me stay." He considered her words, the risk they carried. "Because you are careful too." That was the closest they came to naming what existed between them. They did not touch beyond what was necessary. A hand passed a cup, fingers brushed while folding laundry. These moments carried weight because they were unclaimed. He felt the pull of them, the warmth that came with proximity, and held it with discipline. She did the same. One night, after the child had gone to bed, they stood on the balcony together. The city stretched below them. The woman spoke softly about her work, about the pressure to be decisive, unyielding. He listened, offering nothing but attention. When she finished, she turned to him. "You don't ask me to be different," she said. "No," he replied. "I ask you to be here." She nodded, understanding. In the long middle of staying, love did not arrive with certainty. It arrived with patience. It arrived with the choice to return each day, to share space without ownership, to protect what was forming by not rushing it. He realized then that the middle was not something to endure on the way to something else. It was the thing itself. The place where trust took root. The place where home began to mean more than walls. The first thing to change was the calendar. It did not announce itself with urgency. Meetings simply began to appear farther out, marked weeks in advance. Travel became a possibility again, mentioned casually, as though testing the air. The woman spoke of these things carefully, watching his face without seeming to. He absorbed the information the way he absorbed weather forecasts without panic, but with awareness. He did not ask her to stop. That was the hardest part. He had learned long ago that asking someone to choose you created a debt that could never be repaid cleanly. He would not teach his daughter that love required sacrifice of self. Stability mattered more than proximity. Safety mattered more than desire. The child sensed the shift before either adult named it. She grew more attentive, more deliberate in her affection. She lingered longer at the woman's side, offered drawings unprompted, asked questions that reached just beyond the present. The woman answered each one with care, her voice steady even when her hands betrayed tension. One evening, the woman returned late. Not unpredictably, she had warned them, but later than usual. The child was already asleep. He was at the table, papers spread out, his posture rigid in a way it had not been for months. "I'm sorry," the woman said softly, setting her bag down. He nodded. "I know." They ate together in silence, the food cooling between them. The quiet that once felt settled now carried weight. When she reached for her glass, her hand trembled slightly. He noticed and said nothing. Later she spoke. Not defensively, not dramatically. She told him what was coming: responsibilities she could not delegate, expectations she could not ignore. She did not frame it as a choice yet. She laid out the reality carefully, as though placing something fragile on the table between them. He listened without interruption. When she finished, he folded his hands, grounding himself. "My life can't move," he said. Not accusing, simply true. "It's built around her." "I know," she replied. The child woke that night from a bad dream. He went to her room, sat on the edge of the bed, waited until her breathing evened out again. When he returned to the living room, the woman was still awake, watching the dark. "She's afraid," the woman said quietly. "Yes, of losing you." He shook his head. "Of losing what she knows." The distinction mattered. In the days that followed, they both adjusted instinctively. He reinforced routines, anchoring harder to predictability. The woman tried to compress her life, fitting herself into the margins where she could. Neither pretended this was sustainable forever. The child asked fewer questions now, but she watched everything. One afternoon, as the woman prepared to leave for a trip, the child stood in the doorway, arms crossed. "You'll come back," she said. The woman knelt in front of her. "Yes." "When?" "Soon." The child studied her face carefully, then nodded. "Okay." That night, after the child was asleep, the woman stood in the kitchen, coat still on. "If this hurts her," she said, "I won't." He stopped her gently. "Don't promise what you don't know you can keep." She looked at him then, startled, then understanding. "You're afraid," she said. "Yes," he replied, "and still here." That was the conflict, not whether they cared, but whether care was enough. He had lived through loss that arrived quietly, disguised as inevitability. He would not repeat it for his child. When the woman left the next morning, the apartment felt emptier than it had in months. He held his daughter's hand a little tighter on the walk to school. She leaned into him, silent, trusting him to hold what she could not yet name. He did not know what would happen next, only what he was responsible for. She returned on a quiet afternoon, earlier than expected. There was no announcement, no preparation. He heard the key in the lock while he was helping his daughter with her homework. The child looked up first, her pencil pausing mid-word. When the door opened and the woman stepped inside, travel-worn and still, the child stood without hesitation and crossed the room. "You came back," she said. "Yes," the woman replied, her voice steady. She set her bag down and knelt, holding the child briefly, carefully, as though aware of the weight of the moment. When she stood again, her gaze found his. There was no relief in it, only intention. They did not speak until later. Dinner happened as usual. The child talked about school, about a friend who had lost a tooth, about a story she wanted read before bed. The woman listened, responding where appropriate, letting the routine take precedence. He watched her closely, noting the way she settled back into the rhythm without forcing herself into it. After the child was asleep, they sat at the table, the same place where so many quiet decisions had been made without being named. The woman rested her hands flat against the wood, grounding herself. "I don't want to build something that depends on you waiting," she said, "or on her hoping." He nodded once. "Neither do I." She inhaled slowly. "I can't promise stillness, but I can choose where I return." The words were careful, not an offering of permanence, but of direction. "My life stays centered here," he said. "I won't stretch it thin to make room for someone who can't stay." "I know," she replied. "I won't ask you to." They sat with that, allowing the truth of it to settle. This was not negotiation. It was alignment where it wasn't. The woman continued, her voice quiet but firm. "I'm changing things, not all at once, not loudly, but enough." She did not list them. He trusted that she knew what she meant. He considered the risk in believing her. He thought of his daughter's steady trust, the way she had accepted uncertainty when it was honest. He thought of the woman's consistency, her restraint, her refusal to make promises she could not keep. "I don't need certainty," he said finally. "I need consistency." She nodded. "Then let me show you." That was the choice. Not sealed with emotion, but with commitment, measured in time. The child sensed the shift without being told. The next morning, she placed 3 bowls on the table instead of 2. No one corrected her. The woman smiled softly, meeting his eyes over the rim of her mug. He returned a look, unafraid of what it meant. They moved forward without ceremony. The woman adjusted her schedule in small, deliberate ways. He allowed her deeper into the routines that mattered most. The child thrived in the predictability of their presence, her laughter filling the apartment again. One evening, as they walked together after dinner, the woman reached for his hand. She did not grip it tightly. She simply let her fingers rest against his, waiting. He closed his hand around hers, firm and steady. No promises were made. None were needed. The apartment did not change much after that. It remained the same size, held the same furniture, carried the same familiar marks of use. What changed was the way time moved inside it, less cautious, more assured, as though it no longer needed to check itself at every turn. Morning settled into an easy rhythm. The woman learned which days required silence and which welcomed conversation. She learned the child's moods by the way she tied her shoes, by how quickly she ate her breakfast. When work pulled her away, she returned as promised, never making a show of it. When she stayed fully. He watched for fractures and found none. Trust, once extended, was maintained not through reassurance, but through repetition. She showed up, she listened, she adapted without erasing herself. The child flourished in the certainty of it. She began planning small futures again. School projects, weekend plans, stories that assumed continuity. She no longer asked if the woman would leave. She accepted her presence as something earned, not borrowed. One evening, as winter edged closer, they sat together on the couch, the child between them, a blanket draped carelessly across all 3. The woman read aloud, her voice steady, unhurried. He watched the child's eyes grow heavy, her body relaxing fully into the space they had made. When the story ended, he carried the child to bed, tucking her in with practiced care. The woman lingered in the doorway, watching with a quiet reverence. When he returned, she did not speak. She simply reached for his hand, and he let her. Later, they stood at the kitchen window, the city dim beyond the glass. The woman spoke softly about changes she had made. Roles shifted, priorities clarified. She did not present them as sacrifices. She framed them as choices aligned. "This is where I rest," she said, gesturing not to the apartment, but to the life within it. He understood. Home was not a place that asked for proof. It was a place that remained. In the weeks that followed, nothing dramatic happened. That was the achievement. They attended school events. They shared meals. They argued gently about inconsequential things and resolved them without damage. The woman learned when to lead and when to follow. He learned that accepting help did not diminish him. The child became their compass. When she was calm, they knew they were doing something right. When she faltered, they adjusted. Love expressed itself as attention, as consistency, as choosing the same direction again and again. One night, long after the child was asleep, the woman leaned against him and said, almost to herself, "I've never had this." He did not respond immediately. He placed his hand over hers, grounding them both. "Now you do," he said, not as a promise but as a statement of fact. Outside, the city continued its restless motion. Inside, the apartment held. It held the weight of ordinary days. It held the quiet understanding that no one here needed to perform to be valued. It held a family formed not by design, but by choice, and in that place unchanged, unremarkable, steady they stayed.